but we'll move on anyway. So I'm basically going to follow what was in the invitation and talk about each of the kind of branches of government that we're working with. And I want to make sure there's some time for questions. I know a few questions were submitted earlier, and I will try to hit on those. I do have those documented. So let's get into this and start with the Federal Trade Commission, who we've been very active with. And basically, since the changeover when Lena Khan was named chair, well, let's go back a little farther. A little more than 2 years ago, then Commissioner Rohit Chopra, probably for the first time in 2 decades, a commissioner started uttering the word franchise. And since that time, the FTC has become much more engaged in protecting franchise owners. We look at today's makeup, and even though Mr. Chopra has moved on to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the new chair last year, Lena Khan, actually worked for Mr. Chopra for a while. So it's kind of a disciple of him. And then she named Sam Levine in to be the director of the Consumer Protection Bureau, which is where franchising falls under. And Sam was, up until the end, Mr. Chopra's attorney advisor, right-hand man. So the Federal Trade Commission has really added a priority when they've had no priority in the past. And what's great about the FTC is we have 4 years to work with this FTC. I mean, we're 1 year in already, but there is no midterm election for the Federal Trade Commission. Those commissioners are nominated by the president. The majority party, or the party who has the presidency, the Democrats right now, get 3 seats, and the Republicans get 2 seats. And I'll talk about that makeup in a second. Recently, the FTC filed an action against Burger M, one of our members of AAFD. Previously, California had filed an action and, in a sense, found them guilty of fraud and many other things, and imposed a heavy fine. So some might ask, well, what's the point now with the FTC and the money is gone from Burger M? But you still need some federal actions to do some things. For example, we don't believe that they can actually go after Oren Lani, the founder, in Israel without a federal action taking place. So the Federal Trade Commission filed an action, turned it over to the Department of Justice. It is a civil action because they can only file a civil action. They cannot go file an action against an individual per se. So that has been turned over to the Department of Justice, and we will see where that goes. We're hoping they do, find them, in a sense, guilty in common language of the charges, and then we can take that to the SBA, and I'll talk later about a letter to say, hey, you shouldn't be enforcing these loans when the government failed in their process of protecting franchisees. Basically, the Federal Trade Commission and all of the regulatory agencies have failed to do any protection in this case. So going forward, our hope is that, one, they can go after the founder who took off out of the country with the money, or we assume we did. No one's seen him, so no one knows where he is. And number two, that it does give some leverage to have the at least SBA loans forgiven to those franchisees. Sorry, I didn't put my phone on quiet, did I? I'm as bad as everyone else. The next thing that the FTC has done is they have created a new form for a complaint process. So anyone has a much easier time filing a complaint. We've been working on this with the FTC for about 1.5 years to get it actually up and running and have something there. But the new form, well, just a little background. The old form, you would go to report fraud, and it would put you through all these steps of saying, when did the scammer first contact you? When did the scammer ask for money? Did you send the scammer money? Did you ask for the money back from the scammer? And so by the time you got there and went through the multitude of questions, you really had no clue whether you were filing an FTC complaint for a franchise or what you were filing it for. So the new form is basically a form specifically for franchising. All it asks is who's your franchisor, or who's the franchisor you're filing the complaint with, what's your complaint, and who are you? Very simple. And that will go into their database, but now it'll be earmarked as a franchise complaint. To get to that form, it's very easy. You just go to ftc.gov. You will hit to file a fraud complaint and just follow it through. And it's a couple steps to get to the franchise. You'll see when you hit report fraud that franchise is one of the choices, and you have to hit it twice, but that'll get you to the franchise only complaint form. And we believe that will be beneficial to getting more complaints and more visibility on the complaints, because they will go specifically to the franchise team. And I say franchise team because they actually do now have a franchise team working on this. Historically, as people, I was going to say last year's conference, 2 years ago conference, when we had the attorney who had previously, Craig Trigillis, worked on the franchise effort. I think most of you who were there found out that he had less than half of his time of that one person devoted to franchising. Interestingly enough, his other half was funeral homes. I'm not sure what that match is, franchise and funeral homes. Anyway, they do now have multiple people working specifically on franchising, which I think is great. The next thing is, I told you the majority party has a 3-2 advantage at the FTC. Well, that's once we have someone confirmed. And with Mr. Chopra leaving, that has left the FTC at a 2-2 tie. And for many of our franchise issues, we need that third vote to move things along, whether it's a report, whether it's a filing. The Burger M was a 4-0 vote. So that was so obvious that it kind of crossed the line that we got all the votes. Alvera Bedoya, a professor whose a specialty is privacy issues, has been nominated for that. His nomination got delayed last year. He was renominated this year. He has gone through the first Senate committee on a 14-14 vote. As we know, Washington, D.C. is kind of split, but he will now get a Senate vote. And as long as we have all 50 Democratic senators show up, he will be confirmed. He has really reached out, and I literally communicate with him almost daily. And I've had multiple calls. We had a call with about 10 franchisees from the AAFD directly with him, talking about their challenges. He has taken big steps to try to understand the franchise business and how he can help. And I was on one call with him. So I've had a call with the AAFD with him. We had 8 franchisee attorneys, most of them on our legal line, that were connected with him on a call for an hour and a half. And then we also, AHOA, the hotel owners group, I've had a call with them, and I have a call on Monday with the CFA with him. So he has really taken steps to understand how he can help us. I think the one comment was, he one time says, "I really don't like seeing bullies in the business world, and this franchise business seems to have a lot of bullies." And so he'll be a friend of ours. Next item, as we know, the franchise rule at the FTC has been up for review. That process has been undertaken for almost 2 years. It's really kind of on hold now, and it's on hold for a couple reasons. One, in the end of September, I, along with the 7-Eleven Owners Association, filed a petition to ask the FTC to do what's called a 6B study into the franchise industry. And what that is they have subpoena authority to go in and ask questions as part of a study to evaluate how they should better oversee an industry. It's not um, it's not an action against those brands that are part of the study. Now, we listed 9 brands to be part of that study. And when you think about them considering doing the study or other options, you would want to complete that study or any other actions you may take to understand the industry before you actually update the franchise rule. So I believe that is why it's in some way being delayed on the franchise rule. The reality is, again, we have 3 more years with this FTC. Probably the longer they take through that term to update the franchise rule, the better, because they're going to have more information to better update it to our benefit. And finally, and one thing I'd forgot to put on my my outline of what I was going to cover today is the Government Accountability Office is also doing a study into the inadequacies of the franchise rule and the lack of oversight by the FTC historically. They started on that. It was announced at our June conference, and they started on that actually about July. Representative Schakowsky from Illinois, who oversees the House subcommittee that oversees, or is chair of the House subcommittee that oversees the FTC, made that request of the Government Accountability Office. And I know they're taking it seriously because there's like 6 or 7 people working on it. In fact, Bob and I were just contacted yesterday about some follow-up meetings to it. I know they've interviewed a lot of people. I know they've interviewed a lot of the franchisee lawyers. I believe this is going to be a very thorough study, and I have a hard time believing the study's going to come back and say everything's perfect in the industry and we don't need to change anything. And again, there's probably about three or five, I think, of the legal line lawyers of the AAFD that were included and have been interviewed. In fact, I didn't always tell all of them who I had that I had sent them to the GAO when I got a call from one of them going, "Funny thing, Keith, the Government Accountability Office just called me. Your fingerprints are on this. Did you have anything to do with it?" And I denied anything. I always deny everything. That's one thing I've learned. So that kind of covers the Federal Trade Commission. Federally, legislative-wise, we have a couple things happening in both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. In the House of Representatives on February 1st, and this was announced last June at our conference that this would be happening, Representative Schakowsky introduced HR 6551, the Franchisee Freedom Act. That's kind of a great title, isn't it? I wish it had more, provided a little more freedom, but basically it would allow a private right of action on FTC franchise rule violations. Currently, if a franchisor to a prospective franchisee violates the franchise rule, federally, you have no right to take illegal action against them unless they cross the line into fraud. And fraud is a very high bar to reach legally. And the lawyers can tell you this, I'm not a lawyer. There are also a handful of states, actually handful, I think there's 14 states that do allow a private right of action in their many FTCs. So you do have that right in some states, but it is not a federal right. The Federal Trade Commission cannot necessarily, or it's not believed that they can unilaterally provide that private right of action. Therefore, it has to be legislatively done. And that bill was introduced on February 1st. So talking about action things of what this group needs to do, we will, so that's been introduced for about a month. Pretty soon, we're hoping the Capitol buildings and things open up more and people start going more back to work in the Capitol. I have been to Washington both in November and I was there February 1st for the introduction of the bill. I can tell you it's really bizarre walking around our normally crowded federal buildings and you can hear a pin drop in many of the hallways. When votes get called, it gets busy of people running, but it's still very bizarre not to see the public really throughout the House and Senate buildings. But this is a bill that we are going to need you to contact your members of Congress with. And if you don't know who your member of Congress is, it's very easy. You go to house.gov and there will be a zip code entry. Anyone on this call who doesn't know who their member of Congress is should go look it up and write it down so they have that contact. We hopefully in the next couple of weeks will be sending out some instructions to contact and talking points, excuse me, of getting people to support this bill. And the main talking point is, it really is almost a constitutional question. We have the right as Americans to have access to the courts. Yet in this case, we have been limited from that access. And we believe we should have that right. You also have many franchise agreements have written in them that if the franchisee in the buying process has provided any improper information, the word any is in many of these franchise agreements, they have the right to immediate termination. And the reality is if they can terminate us for making any error in the buying process, why can't we take action against them if they have misrepresented anything, whether it was intentional or not? If the damage is caused, we should have the right to seek damages. The last thing in the House of Representatives are small business COVID relief bills. I hate to say 2 days ago that went out the window. They passed an omnibus plan that did not include the Restaurant Revitalization Fund or any other funds at this point. There is also a GYMS Act out there that is specifically designed to help many in the fitness category who haven't been helped much up to now. That bill's still active, but it's pretty stagnant. And so that might be something that targeted people we will have reach out to targeted members to try to get their support. There's actually, that GYMS Act actually is in both the House and the Senate, 2 separate bills, has quite a few co-sponsors. It's bipartisan, but it's not moving. And, let's face it, the situation in Ukraine and not being able to finalize on budget packages is keeping them busy. It seems to be everything always runs to the end of the line, and it's hard to get any legislation passed. So let's move to the Senate. And I want to make sure I have time for people to ask some questions and that I answer the questions that were submitted in advance. So in the U.S. Senate, and we've previously talked about much of this, Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada is kind of our hero. She has fought and fought and fought for franchisees and some protections. Last April, she issued a very, very long report. I believe we have put a link to that on the AAFD website that highlights certain brands that are bad and recommended actions to improve the industry. If you get in any contact with any of your Senate members, and you can actually point it out to your House members, always be sure to mention that report and highlight that report. If you send them anything in an email, send a copy of that report. I think that report is very well done and comprehensive of issues that we have in the industry. And, we really need to support her on that report. She has not had a lot of support on that. Again, most senators are busy with other things. And so trying to get their focus on that has been problematic. To find out who your senator is, you go to senate.gov, both very easy websites, and look up the state, obviously, you're in. You have 2 senators for every state. Senator Cortez Masto has also introduced Senate Bill 1120, which is the SBA Franchise Transparency Act. What that bill would do is require any brand that receives SBA loans, they would be required in their disclosure document in item 19 to have certain disclosures. Right now in item 19, that's the financial representation section. Franchisors have the option of putting data there. About 65% of franchisors do put some financial representation data there. Sometimes it's very basic. Here's our average unit volume, period. Sometimes it's very detailed, average unit volumes and cost by type of location, whether it's standalone, inline, etc. So there's varying degrees of what is in item 19. This bill would require franchisors to put revenue data on first year in operation. It would also require them, I believe in item 20 actually, to put how many outlets failed in the first year. So those of you who have gotten SBA loans or looked at SBA loans, one of the first things you have to provide is a pro forma for year one. In year one, you have to show enough profit to be able to satisfy that loan, hit a debt equity ratio. And so you really need to know first year revenues. What are first year revenues in that brand? And yet that's not required. The importance of this, I also am doing some work with the Hotel Owners Association, and they're actually excluded from this bill, this requirement, for two reasons. One, hotel owners tend to have an extremely low default rate on SBA loans. That is primarily because they also have great collateral. For most of us, as you know, I'm a Subway franchisee. I'm renting an inline space with used equipment. There really isn't a lot of collateral in that business if I fail. But a hotel owner has dirt and a large building on it. It's great collateral to satisfy any default on a loan. So that's one reason they were excluded. But also, average unit volume is not a number that really resonates in that industry. They use RevPAR because a hotel with 50 outlets versus 100 outlets would have completely different revenue numbers. However, it's still important to all franchisees or all franchise brands who might be getting SBA loans, which hotel brands do, because when you look at the default rates of many of these brands that shouldn't be getting loans, they were highlighted in the Cortez Master report, that some of them have default rates of almost 50%. Well, technically, in the end, us as taxpayers are on the hook to pay those guarantees. But in reality, what the SBA does in their program is when you get a loan, they're collecting, like any loan, their fees or points up front, and they're charging you a rate for that loan. They need to charge high enough fees and high enough rates to satisfy any defaults. So it's a self-funding program. Well, theoretically, it's a self-funding program. The reality is a majority out of the last 10 years, they have had to go to Congress and actually ask for funding to supplement that supposed self-funding program. Why this is important for people who maybe are in good brands without high default rates is you're actually paying higher fees and higher rates to satisfy this self-funding program. And when you think about it from a hotel owner standpoint, if I'm opening a Subway, what am I taking out? A $200,000-$300,000 loan? To build a hotel, you're taking out a multi-million-dollar hotel. And 1% difference is like real money, as they say. So that's why it's important to them. The second bill that Senator Cortez Masto has presented is Senate Bill 2162, the SBA Loan Default Rate Act. And that bill is very simple. All it asks is the SBA to publish default rates by franchise brand quarterly. Now think about this. When you go to buy your franchise, you were sent this large packet, the disclosure document. Now I know I didn't read it back in 1988, all of it. I didn't understand it. Most of us don't understand it very well. And there's a lot of things you can do on representations, the financial representations that make things look better than they actually are. But if you think you're looking at 2 or 3 brands to buy, and you go look at their SBA default rates, and one of them has 30% default rates, another one has 12, and another one has 1%. I mean, that covers a lot of reading that disclosure document right there. I mean, you don't need to read the disclosure document probably if you find out a brand has 30% default rates. Think of what that can do to protect people from buying into bad brands. And that's why that bill is important. So we need to probably re-energize the group to contact their senators as to why these bills are important. Now, you know, the difficult part with the 2 Senate bills is for most people, and even the House bill, you're looking at, well, I'm well past that point. It doesn't matter. I've already, signed my franchise agreement. I maybe don't get SBA loans. But all of this is really foundational to change the industry, to provide better disclosure, better transparency. And we're not going to fix the industry if we don't fix it foundationally. So the last thing Senator Cortez Masto has done is she recently, last week, sent a letter to the Small Business Administration, basically asking them to look at loans of these companies that have been found to be bad actors. Burger M, Dental Fix is another one that has had multiple states, a couple states tag it. And she brought in a couple newer brands into that. I Heart Mac and Cheese. I know we don't have a member there, but that's another brand that seems to be moving in the direction of almost the next Burger M, of selling hundreds of units and having a model that's broken, but they're getting SBA loans. So she has sent a letter to them to follow up on her previous actions, to say, hey, you need to give us an update on this. With that update, I also am requesting you forgive loans to these brands that the government has already proven as being frauds, like Burger M. So it's a little, not sure the exact number. I think I've been told 140 loans Burger M franchisees, SBA loans have active or have taken out. I've heard 109 also, but it's over 100 either way. And well, it won't make these people whole. If that loan can be forgiven, that would probably keep their head above water and out of bankruptcy court and losing their house. So, we really have to give credit to the senator for taking strong action and not just passing by. People ask me why we don't have more legislators supporting us. People will always hear, well, I support small business. There's not a legislator in the world who says they don't support small business. But the reality is, we as franchise owners are a kind of a unique business, and we're somewhere in between. Yes, we're small business, but when we have disagreements like some of the legislation or the FTC work that we're working on, we're actually at odds with big business. And therein lies the problem. Big business is more active and finances more campaigns than small business does. So we kind of get tossed aside or not really recognized because we're arguing against the big business, which means it's all more important for all of the franchisees to be engaged, to be active with their member of Congress. It's not hard to be active with your member of Congress. You can usually invite them to your business and they'll come. That doesn't cost a lot of money. Develop that relationship. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of franchisees and there aren't near that many franchisors. We truly have the advantage of feet on the ground, even if we don't have the money aspect. The final thing I'd like to cover, and I'll do it fairly quickly because it's just unique to California, We do have a franchise bill in California that updates its current franchise law. We passed a very significant bill in 2015. Bob was very active with that, and in fact had a bill that AAFD was a sponsor of in 2013 and 2014 that passed, but then vetoed by Governor Brown. We all came back and worked together in 2015 and passed some very significant legislation. This bill, which AFD is a sponsor of, in California, by the way, the terminology is the legislator who submits the bill is the author, and then you can have organizations be the sponsor. So AFD is one of the sponsors of AB 676. This bill does some updates to what we did in 2015, and it does some nice subtle changes to protect franchise owners. I know one of the things we heard within AFD was during COVID, franchisors would offer assistance, but then in the offer of assistance that people had to sign a general release that released all liability, previous liability away from the franchisor, or they were required to sign updates to their franchise agreement. I even had one, I believe it was in the hotel brand, that they added a whole new liquidated damages section in exchange for some COVID relief. And often the COVID relief was not actually forgiving money, it was just deferring payments that a franchisee couldn't make because they weren't operating. So one of the things this bill does is actually makes it illegal for a franchisor to demand a general release or contract changes in exchange for any assistance during a declared national or federal or state declared emergency. So that's one of the things we have in there. We have some rights in there on transferring to make things easier. And we have some very strong language prohibiting disclaimers, questionnaires from, in a sense, forgiving the franchisor from any reliance on what they've documented. You know, so California, if this passes, and we did pass the Assembly 63-1, it's now over to the Senate. We're hopefully in the next month we'll have some hearings. So I'll be reaching out to California members to help move that along. You know, kind of one point I want to make. This last week, I was contacted by two franchisees from two different brands, one on Friday, one on Saturday. None of them very small brands, but both of them were from Texas. And when they find out I'm from California, they kind of chuckled and said, yeah, it must really suck operating in a state where you have all these regulations, and they go on and on about how free Texas is and how horrible California is. And they're not completely wrong on everything. But then each of them gave their story to me. And in the end, I had to say, you know, if you were in California, we could probably help you, but you have no protections in Texas. I'm sorry, there's not, I mean, we can file an FTC complaint, but from a state aspect, you have no protection. So I thought it was kind of humorous almost that, you know, I guess we all want regulations that protect us, and we don't want regulations that we have to comply with that don't help us. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. So that's the end of covering what we're working on right now, the primary aspects of what we're working on. The key thing is we are going to need franchisees to not only engage themselves, but get the people in their brands to engage. If something bad is happening in your brand, you know, you need to file a complaint with the FTC. It does not need to be pre-sale disclosure. They will consider things, this FTC will, under the Unfair Acts or Practices Act, Section 5, that they may look into. But if they get one complaint, I mean, let's face it, they can't look into every complaint that has one, or every brand that has one complaint. If you get 10, 20, 100 complaints on a brand, that makes it much more difficult for them to act. So why don't I hit the questions that were submitted as part of the when you signed up. I'm gonna, let's see, I'll do Joel, you had the first question. Is there a way to get the IFA to be more franchisee focused? I'm not sure. It's frustrating because I know a lot of people, a lot of franchisees who I don't know a lot, I guess. I know a few franchisees who are part of their franchisee forum. The IFA has a franchisee forum, but the agenda is pretty much controlled by the staff that is more franchisor focused. For example, it was less than 2 weeks ago, they just had their convention. The franchisee forum met. They did not discuss either the California franchise bill or the private right of action. How can they not discuss those? Those are active bills to protect franchisees. Obviously, franchisors aren't in favor of those, but somehow we need to get that franchisee forum to act a little more independently and say, yes, this is an important topic for us to discuss. Look, on some of those bills like that, the IFA should probably be neutral if they claim to represent franchisees and franchisors. But to date, the IFA hasn't supported any franchisee favorable legislation. And, I know I think we have a member or two that also are part of that franchisee forum. And I would only ask that you bring it up. Look, when I push bills, when I post things on LinkedIn, et cetera, one of the things I always do is I may include my opinion, but I always include a copy of the bill. I want franchisees to read the bills and make their own determination. When you have lobbying groups that basically say you need to be opposed to this bill or because of bang, 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 but not showing them the bill, that's disingenuous as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know, Joel, if we can answer that. And then can a forum be created for private messaging about bad franchisors with specific examples? I don't know. We at the AFD can pull back on that and try to see if that's something that we can possibly set up on our website and have that type of forum. I assume you're meaning that people can put something there and it'll be somewhat confidential, that it's not something that everyone can see, because that's the main problem. Franchisees are afraid to complain or be active because of retaliation. Fernando asked, is legislation being contemplated, yeah, I can speak English sometimes, to limit the practice of required arbitration and the inconvenient forums imposed by franchisors? That's a tough one because, yes, states have put forum clauses in. California has a forum clause in, but it can't override the Federal Arbitration Act, and the Supreme Court has upheld that. So if arbitration clauses are in franchise agreements, it's very difficult to do anything about it. Some states sometimes will say, well, it's unconscionable, certain terms, but that's few and far between. So it would be something that has to change federally. And you see some arbitration language coming up more on other things, parking places, rent-a-car stuff, where the House has looked at saying you can't require arbitration, the House of Representatives, but none of that legislation has really moved forward. So unfortunately, there's probably not a great answer to that unless there's a real uprising. But again, this is again why people need to really be active, because in general, most members of Congress don't think there's problems in franchising, because that's what they've been told by the other side, how everything is great in franchising. And if that's what they're hearing, that's what they believe. We really need to, knock that wall down, that franchising is a great business model when done correctly. but there's too many bad actors and too much control in this business against the investor being the franchisee. Jessica Bush, tutor doctor, I know you have filed a complaint last year, and that's on me, I believe, to follow up with the FTC to see if they're, every complaint isn't going to get heard necessarily. Maybe sometimes they'll write a letter. The more complaints a brand, if you have problems, the more complaints filed, the better. So Jessica, I'll follow up with you on that. Larry Jackson asked, need SBA IEDL loan forgiveness from COVID. That's in some of the packages, the bigger packages. I can't say I've been super active in that because I've been concentrating on the strict franchise issues, but maybe I'll reach out to you and try to follow up on that. And let's see, need a cost-effective and high-quality healthcare solution. Yep, we do, but I'll let other people through some of the vendors, the sponsors in the AFD, probably answer that more. David Kahn asked, what are the chances of establishing a separate class of protections for franchisees of large franchisors, such as 500 or more units? Wow, I had actually never thought of that question, and maybe I'll reach out to you and think about that. And in my discussions with the either state regulators or the FTC, maybe bring that up. I'd like to talk to you. I don't have a good answer for that on it because I had never thought of it really, but I'd love to hear more. Let's see, and then Kim Parada. Lawyer obviously has to ask more than one question, right? No, he's not I don't know, you're not a lawyer, Kim. You just ask a lot of questions. Question one, status on all of the above. Well, I think I did that. How can we help assist? It basically is that the franchisees need to be active, and it's our job. We need to do a better job of getting materials in your hand to be active. What can be done to update all AFD materials? I can do the legislative ones. Beyond that, that's kind of a bigger question, so the group can have, and we'll talk about that on our team call, which will be next Thursday. I think, Bob, that's something to put in. What can be done to update AFD materials? And the next thing is what efforts can be made to recruit additional chapters and members. I think that's something for our team call that we need to do. What influence does social media play on moving some of the items forward? Quite a bit. You know, I'm more of a LinkedIn fan and do a lot of posting, and AFD does. But I have to tell you, most legislators are on Twitter. Twitter seems to be the thing that they concentrate on. And so it definitely plays a role, but it's a public role, and franchisees are afraid of that public step. So we need to get over that. And the last question, which of our listed attorneys can we call upon to draft a TQF, Total Quality Franchising, addendum to be presented to franchisors by prospective franchisees? I think that's, again, something kind of for the AFD to work on, not necessarily a legislative thing. So I think that's all the questions that were submitted.
That were submitted to the chat, and just read those to you. Let me go back to the first one. One that came up from Jessica. We filed a complaint through you a year ago. Do they need to refile with a new form?
No, it shouldn't have to. I'll double check on that, and if they want it refiled, I'll get it refiled. So that's actually a good question.
Excellent. Next one is, are there any advocacy efforts to limit franchisors' common practice of imposing arbitration and ability to object to reasonable choices of arbiters?
Yeah, I think we kind of hit on that question. you know, and Bob put in the chat that yes, Biden did make a statement about the being unconscionable, some of these arbitration clauses. You know, we'll keep trying on that. We have tried to put it in state language to even forbid arbitration clauses, because the question is, if you never had an arbitration clause, would the Federal Arbitration Act kick in? So can a state actually forbid arbitration clauses in a contract? And that hasn't been tested yet.
I've got one from personal sources. Is there anything being done to limit a franchisor's ability to circumvent the contract and put things in the operations manual? How about that, Keith?
Yeah. That's something we're trying to, I've been giving more and more examples, and I can tell you when there's been discussions with the FTC, they're wanting examples of things like that. In fact, I just gave them one last night. Choice Hotels is now requiring all of its franchisees to sign a group purchasing agreement that requires them to purchase through their purchasing, their group purchasing power group that they call it. Yet the prices aren't cheaper. And it was interesting because I look back, they have it in the new franchise agreement, the new disclosure, but prior to the first time it went in was April 2020, which means you have a whole bunch of franchisees now being required, and they will be penalized if they don't sign this group purchasing power, group purchasing organization agreement. There will be fines levied on them, yet that was never disclosed. So that was an example I just sent to the FTC last night, in fact. So it's on the radar. It's like a lot of things. We can find examples that are ridiculous, that definitely cross the line. And, then we can also look at 20-year agreements that were signed in 1995 that went through 2015. Well, the internet, who was using the internet and cell phones and apps in 2000 or in 1995, or for that matter, 2000 to 2020. So, changes have to happen sometimes, but when does it become contractual? When does it cross that line is not always clear cut on doing it.
Okay, and as I said in the chat box, if you have any other questions for Keith, if you want to just raise your hand, I'm just trying to avoid people speaking up all at once. Or if you can do it without stepping on anyone talking, just unmute yourself and feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question. I think we have a couple minutes left, just being respectful of everyone's time. I think we got to all the other questions in the chat box. I know you took care of the ones that were submitted ahead of time.
Can I be heard?
That means I put everyone to sleep. And it's not even early for them. Everyone's taking their lunchtime nap, huh?
Any questions?
Am I unmuted, Keith?
No, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay, good. Keith, thank you for today. We've had several discussions, and I appreciate your guidance and all the effort you're putting into this. Now, as a member of the AAFD, my question is this. We have our total quality franchising and we have our franchisee bill of rights. Now, as naive as I may be, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, but when you take Robert and on down with all of the legal eagle minds that we have, suppose we were to get in front of this to some degree. And by that, I mean, suppose we were to create or craft an addendum. And I think it was kind of addressed a little earlier, but an addendum that speaks to specifically the things that we'd like to see in an agreement by virtue of an addendum that would be added to the FDDs or franchise agreements for franchisors who wanted to come aboard. Now, listen, I'm with you. I understand how significant it is to maintain standards and things of that nature. And I'm not suggesting that we say anything that would compromise that. Although there are some issues relative to the operations manual and so on. But why not step ahead of this? Get that addendum drafted by using all of these legal minds that we have. Get an addendum drafted and put it out there. And frankly, and I say this respectfully, frankly, we can begin to perhaps, I hate to use the term, but maybe we embarrass some people in letting them know that this is what we're talking about. And in terms of our senators and our legislators, here's what we're thinking. And, you know, rather than we do these things, we do significant stuff and we do it by the piece. But suppose we were to put that addendum in their hands and say, hey, this is what this looks like. And we'd like to see this added to every franchise agreement. And we just go right down the lines from item 1 to item 23 or 22. And we just go right down the line and address each and every issue. Again, I'm not so naive as to think that everybody's going to sign on, but wouldn't that be us getting ahead of, you know, what it is we're trying to do in terms of influencing IFA? Listen, that's not going to happen. You know, they parachute in their zealots and they fight us tooth and nail on everything. And they fight our cherished franchisees who need assistance and help. So listen, I've asked my question, I've said enough, but you understand my point. So I'm done. But thank you very much for the time.
Go ahead, Bob.
Robert, good to meet you.
I'd like to respond to Kim. But before I do, I want to thank you, Keith, for not just a great presentation, but the folks on this call should know that Keith has been a tireless advocate. He's made a lot of statements today that have indicated that we're getting a lot of support from the Democratic side of the aisle. We have a lot of our membership is probably as divided politically as the United States is, and it's a head scratcher to Keith and I both that we haven't had more support on the Republican side of the aisle, which has always professed to be the party of small business. The reality is that franchisee groups such as yours tend to look more like unions. I hate to use that word, but we're getting a lot of support on the Democratic side. I do want to make a pitch to you guys that that our conference, and especially the conference this year, where we have federal trade commissions, I think the SBA, the Consumer Affairs, Dale Cantone, who has been the chief spokesman for all the different states. We have a huge lineup and an opportunity to express ourselves so the more people can work their way to our conference for that purpose. The real takeaway is what you're going to get from sharing with your fellows that are on this call and delegates from all of our different chapters. That's the best part of the AFD conference. So I want you to know about that. Kim, to your point, to your suggestion, which is a great suggestion, and I will pick it up again, but it was our plan when we produced the AFD Fair Franchising Standards. And if you read the standards, you'll see in the foreword that it was always part of it, that for each standard, we would create a clause that would enable whatever the standard was, a recommended clause. We also had an intention to create a model franchise agreement written from the perspective, I think exactly what you have proposed. But you suggested that we bring our great legal minds, which we do, and we all came together and we all had our favorite agreements, including me, and we couldn't agree on what those clauses would look like. So what we have done to that place is we have, I think, 18 agreements that have won AFD accreditation. Those agreements are all 95% conforming to the AFD standards. I have my own version. Most recently, the Griswold chapter, which was like 99% conforming to our standards. So we have sample agreements. Yes, I think we would try it again, but I'll tell you the pride of authorship got in our way from the different attorneys that had their own viewpoints on how to do it. But yes, that's something we can look up again. I think we only got agreement on 1 or 2 clauses in the standards. If you guys don't know what the AAFD Fair Franchising Standards are, and Kim, this is very important for you to understand. When we decided to produce a body of standards, originally the idea was it was going to be our manifesto, it was going to be the franchisee's perspective. And we got together with a committee and we said, why are we doing this? We should bring franchisors into the discussion. We should bring attorneys into the discussion. And we did. We had about 60 participants. Some major franchisors were participants. We set up a rule that in order to pass a standard, we would debate every aspect of franchising. And we had a franchisor committee, a franchisee committee, and a lawyer committee. And each of those committees had to pass that standard by a majority vote. So the franchisors basically had a veto power over our standard, and franchisees did as well. And then the whole committee had to adopt the standard by a 2/3 vote. With that huge mountain of problems, we were able to adopt 140 different standards, usually by unanimous vote, with a lot of major franchisors singing in. So I encourage you to get the standards. We can provide it to you in PDF. It's available on Amazon. If you're Amazon Prime, I'm pretty sure it's free. So that goes a long way, Kim, to what you were talking about, but what it misses is the actual addendum to the franchise agreement that we would purport. So anyway, I'm going to get off my pedestal. Keith, thank you for doing it.
And a couple responses to Kim. One, there is a comprehensive fair franchising bill that Cortez Masto has drafted, or we've worked on with her, that if we got a Republican sponsor, we would introduce it tomorrow. So there is a bill that would require a lot of the changes. I think you'll also be very pleased, AHOA, the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, has their 12 points of franchising, and that's been kind of dormant for 6-7 years. Their convention is about a month from today, actually, or the 12th, I think, April 12th. You're going to see, I think, some fairly significant news around what they're doing with their 12 points of franchising. And so I can't bring it out in the press yet, but over the next month, I think, they're a very powerful organization. They have 20,000 members. They have millions of dollars of war chest, in a sense. Very powerful member. And I think the rest of us in franchising are going to need to kind of follow their lead on it, because I think they're going to be very newsworthy over the next month, or mainly at their convention. And I think it's not only going to be transformational for them in the lodging industry, but it's a stepping stone for all of us in franchising. One question did come in, Keith. Do you think the Cortez Masto bills would have prevented the Burger M fraud? It would have cut it off a lot quicker. They wouldn't have necessarily stopped it. I mean, this Oren Lonnie had this plan, but if the data had to be put in the disclosure document, I believe there wouldn't have been 1,500 people who would have bought into it. So it would have been minimized. I don't think, it's going to be very difficult to ever cut off a bad actor from hurting someone. But we got to get it cut off before it hurts 300 or 1,500. And I think those bills would have kept a lot of people from buying it. And I think FTC enforcement would have kept that number a lot lower.
And with that, just it is about 6 minutes past the hour. I'm going to formally thank Keith for his information today. And again, there's going to be more of this at our conference. Yes, I'm pushing the conference. I am one of the co-chairs of the conference. I don't make money for you attending the conference, but I would appreciate your in-person support because that's how we make it more effective and valuable for everybody. Talk to your coordinators if you're not sure what to do, how to do it, but I include the link there. Thank you, Bob, for hosting these as part of the overall Franchise Leadership Council Summit and the Leadership Summit itself. Any other questions that weren't answered today, please submit them through your coordinator or reach out to Keith directly. We do what we can to help our franchisees and answer those questions, especially along the legislative factors. And Keith does a great job keeping his finger on the pulse, as well as being our voice out there. And as he said, he does need our help as well. More details to follow in terms of what to do and how to reach out to your senators or representatives. With that said, have a great Thursday
Rich, before you close, we haven't quite finalized it, but mark your calendars for April the 7th, which is our next town hall. I don't know if you were going to address that, Rich, but we believe, I'm trying to get final confirmation that town hall is going to be centered around retirement planning and some great new legal opportunities that will benefit franchise owners immensely in terms of your own retirement plans. That'll be presented by Access Retirement Services, which is our partner for the AAFD pooled employer plans, which is one of there are two major legal or legislative enhancements that one started in 2021 and one started at the beginning of this year, which could be game changers. So it's more on the economic side, but mark your calendars for April the 7th.
And you will see emails about that coming out over the next 2 weeks or so once we finalize the specifics. Thank you for that reminder, Bob. And again, everyone have a great day and rest of your week.
I think you got a hand raised here.
Oh, she's just saying bye, I think.
I am going to formally stop the recording.
See everyone in what?